Hi, I'm Lars WIkman, and I'll be talking about keeping secrets, and it's an adventure with the Raspberry Pi. I got into nerves pretty much immediately after I got into Elixir. There were talks by Justin Schneck and Frank Hunleth that I looked at about the same time I was looking at Phoenix, and saw those conference talks, and I have Raspberry Pis and I've toyed around with them. It's kind of fun, and all of the stuff they're doing looks much more convenient than Raspbian. So Nerves was my way into getting in touch with the community, and it's really the first time I got into a software community. I've used plenty of software tools, like PHP, Python, I've done tons of that. But it was the first time I actually kind of got involved. And I ported an e-ink display from Python to Elixir and made some blog posts about it and got tons of support from people in the Nerves Slack to get that going. So Nerves, very much my path into Elixir, even though I'm mostly done web dev. And that has led to working with, right now I'm working with 2 Nerves clients. So I run a small consultancy, and right now I have 2 clients I'm working with that do Nerves. I'm working with Frank and his team over at SmartRent, doing things with thermostats. This talk is not at all about thermostats. That has been covered, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, very fond place for Nerves in my heart, and I've had help from everyone across the Nerves core team and across the Nerves community getting into this stuff, and then being able to actually work with it is a thrill. And then I have another client. They'd rather be a little bit private. Maybe they're ashamed about using CM4s for their industrial automation. But I get to talk about what I did with them. I don't get to talk about who they are. But it's super fun because I get to toy around with hardware and Elixir, and that's kind of my happy place. So it started out with me just running a workshop for them because they picked up Elixir and Nerves. They thought it seemed good for the hardware they were doing, but they didn't know Elixir and they weren't sure that they had gotten the ideas right. So we ran a workshop, and I helped them get settled, figure some things out, and poke a lot of hardware, poke around with it. Lots of hacking. And then when they were kind of happy with the structure of the application and architectural concerns and lots of questions about how it worked, we started looking at kind of the security aspects because they have a security sensitive domain. Turns out the CM4 is not really built for security, turns out. That's a spoiler. So one of the things they and most people that want to secure a device want to do is to store some data encrypted on the device. So if someone takes the device or yanks the device, yanks the SD card out of the device, they don't get free access to whatever's on the device. So that's about keeping secrets. And they knew about Nerves Hub. Nerves Hub is a very good pitch for Nerves. People want what Nerves Hub offers. I think it's a very strong pitch. They'd gotten Nerves keys, they had gotten started, they'd self-hosted it a little bit. So they have these ATEC 608Bs from Microchip. That's the Nerves key device if you haven't looked close. And a brief aside, John already mentioned Nerves Cloud. I've spoken to Josh as well, super curious about that stuff. So if you're at all interested, look into it. Sign up for the waiting list, get on there. Anyway, we have this Nerves key device, an ATEC 608B. This is not a 608, or it might be a 608, I'm not actually sure, it might be a 508. But the little dark picture there is mine that I got off of Justin in Prague many years ago and kind of soldered up last month and used. But these are the chips that we know as NervesKey, like the Attack series. And supposedly the 508 was kind of weak, and it also had very few features. So they made the 608 and added more features. And then some people making a talk for Black Hat decided, why not shoot it with lasers? A lot of lasers until it gives up its secrets. So they made the 608B, which supposedly has fire resistance. And then they made 608C, and I'm not sure why, and I wonder what people shot it with. And I wonder what the resistances are now. It's unclear. For one thing, they don't publish full data sheets, which is endlessly frustrating. But NervesKey, the library, is a very opinionated subset of the larger kind of ATAC chip feature set. I think that's fair to say. It's essentially much more human-friendly and developer-friendly than what you get out of the data sheet and what the chip can actually do. It's kind of involved. But so with NervesKey, you get 2 private keys, one that's a primary and one that's a changeable auxiliary key. You also get a bunch of device identifiers and stuff as you lock the chip down. And then you can use the rest of the chip for read and write storage, if I'm not mistaken. So the device will let you hide private keys, and you can do asymmetric elliptic curve encryption, so public-private key stuff, signatures, and decryption without exposing your private keys. So you can do TLS, which is nice. I didn't used to read data sheets. That didn't used to be my life. Now I kind of enjoy them. It gets weird. But if you check the summary data sheet of a 608 chip, it says AES, symmetric encryption and decryption. It has said that ever since the 608A. So I thought, sweet. This client wants to hide some secrets, and that's how you hide secrets, encryption. So we should just be able to encrypt and decrypt inside the chip, keep the secrets in there. They only really move into memory at one time. We keep them in memory. We never store them on disk. That sounds sweet. And that assumption was absolutely correct and caused no trouble later on. This is a brief aside. There will be many brief asides. This is not an SD card. This is my audio interface, because I'm foolish enough to do audio and video work on Linux, which mostly works. Someone appreciates bravery. For some reason, I do have a script easily available that just resets all my USB controllers every now and then, which I unfortunately need. But my audio interface is a terrible place to flash firmware. But FWUp has seen it for a couple of years now. It has 0.0 megs of space and is probably read-only if I tried. I haven't tried to flash Nerves firmware to this thing. And working with Nerves is a delight. Like, the tooling is wonderful compared to everything else I've dealt with, but it's even more delightful to realize that you can actually just report this issue. And I could have tried to fix it, but I just reported the issue and Frank fixed it, because that's how it works sometimes. So the 500th time I burnt an SD card, I just got the question, do you want to flash it to your audio interface, or do you want to flash it to the SD card? And I got okay, it's time to log an issue. And then it was fixed in a day, and I tested it, and it's merged, and it should be coming. So actually, does anyone else have a device that pops up that you don't want to flash firmware to? One! Yes! Success. Yeah. So, meanwhile, at the client, another sidetrack, but this time also about security. So networking came up. And there's a standard called 802.1x, which controls network access and usage, and it is commonly used for wireless. And actually, it also fully supports wired networks. And we wanted to be able to do wired 802.1x to kind of identify which devices was allowed on the network. Has anyone done 802.1x? Oh, you're lucky. Anyone have experience with PAP MSHAP? No? Oh, lucky. Well, if you start reading about 802.1x and authentication on networks, you will find out that the most common thing people do is use PAP MSHAP, v2 actually. And it's the most common thing used, but you will also find out immediately that PAP MSHAP is terrible, quite broken, and considered very insecure. It is also the most commonly used option. Has anyone heard of EAP TLS? No? Still no. We should all be using EAP TLS, apparently. So that requires the client to have a certificate, so often dubbed a device certificate. And I wonder how we could achieve that. So I had never done 802.1x before either, so don't feel bad. So I wanted to verify that I could get it to work at all, because a lot of the documentation on this stuff is about Windows. And if you ever need to do it, there's an open source free Radius server, because you need to talk to a Radius server. Yes, the telecom protocol. Yes. It's kind of a throwback, kind of Erlang. But there's a server, free Radius. You can just install it if you need to toy around with this stuff. And you also need a managed switch, so you can tell the switch port to, well, you actually do have to talk to the Radius server before you're allowed to do anything. I did it with Ubiquiti Unify Gear. It's kind of straightforward. So I tested MSHAP v2 from a Raspbian device, so just to have proven, like, okay, I can set this up this way. Did any of you know that WPA supplicant is like not limited to Wi-Fi? Who here has dealt with WPA supplicant at all? Yeah, okay, a decent number, yeah. So the upper definition is, so this is from the notes part of VintageNet, which is a small treasure trove of like Linux network config variants. So the upper part is the definition for the interface, and it says, oh, use the VPA driver wired and like use the VPA supplicant. And then there's a VPA supplicant conf, and you can see it's like IEEE 802.1x actually. And down there you can see we're doing MSHAP, and the EAP is PAP, so you can see we're doing PAP MSHAP here. I found it weird that I was going to use the VPA supplicant for wired. I'm always associated very closely with Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi not working on Linux. So, VintageNet delegates networking to Linux. Does VintageNet let you do VPA supplicant for wired networks? Of course not. No one ever does. Clearly, no one ever does. Like I asked you all. Except now someone wants to do it, and it's me. So, so I delegate. I have a team. My lovely teammates, they're very patient, very persistent, and we had a session while I was over at the office where some of them work, and we forked all the VintageNet repos. No, 3 of them. And we copied the WPA supplicant from Wi-Fi to Ethernet, and they just went hacking on it, and then we figured out how the WPA supplicant driver stuff works. And we realized the wired driver is not at all included in Nerves. So that's convenient. But that also led to one of my teammates getting their first PR merged into a Nerves system, because now the wired driver is at least in the Pi4 repo, and it will be added to more later. And my other team, yeah? It's released? Hot off the presses. Oh, sweet. It's all in all of them? Oh, sweet. Yeah. Meanwhile, my other teammate, Elliot, did the tidy thing and started cleaning up all our hacking and actually making a separate library for the supplicant. So We got the Nerves device connected to our tiny 802.1x network, and we have achieved PAP MSHAP, which is not what we want at all. We need EAP TLS. So as I left Sweden, the work continued. Elliot was hacking away at 2 parallel efforts. So get the changes tidy enough to merge into mainline VintageNet, because we do make a bunch of changes. And Frank is over there. So I don't think it will be merged now, probably next week, because there's some work to be done. But then Elliot is also cracking away at achieving EAP TLS with NervesKey, because MSHAP is terrible, and we shouldn't be using it. So let's talk about the NervesKey bit, and how we can use it for some of these really cool things. Anyone used OpenSSL? If you're not raising your hand, you're lying. So OpenSSL, our good buddy that does all the encryption everywhere all the time, follows a standard type of deal called PKCS11, which allows us to plug in alternative engines for secret management and general crypto needs. Like you can plug in crypto accelerators, and this allows us to delegate to that plucky little chip on the attack what we would otherwise be doing on the CPU. And that gets us away from having keys on disk. So then we go from something where someone just has to pull the SD card to something where they have to shoot very precisely with lasers to get at what we're trying to hide. And this is how NervesHub and NervesKey interact using TLS over PKCS11 with the NervesKey PKCS11 library. This has been a rabbit hole. These days there are also libraries from the vendor, Microchip, via crypto auth-lib. So this is cool. Our device can be allowed on the network by virtue of just being our device, or at least having our chip. So that's a separate thing. They just take our chip. So if we want it to be both our device and our code that's running, we get into more hairy things. So I love the Raspberry Pi. I don't want to hate on the Raspberry Pi. That's what got me poking with hardware at all. Like I'm not an electrical engineer. I'm barely an engineer at all. I'm probably not formally in Germany. Different rules. But the Pi got me to poke around with electronics at all, and it also got me into the Nerves ecosystem, and now I get to talk to companies and work with them on Nerve stuff. So the Raspberry Pi is great. I love it. But it is not the most professional device. Well, kind of. It's a device that's dictated by the Broadcom BCM2711 chip. And that's a chip that was designed for set-top boxes and video displays and stuff. Produced massive quantities, massive scale, which is why the Raspberry Pi can be cheap. It's also why it's weird and why the GPU is kind of involved when you're booting the device for some reason. So it's kind of powerful. It can drive to 4K displays. It's cool. But there is essentially only one real security mechanism on the CM4. So the Raspberry Pi CM4, compute module. It can do secure boot. It has a very particular way of doing secure boot that is not quite similar to anything else, it seems, but you can set a public key certificate in the bootloader, and then you can burn a fuse to make it permanent. And if you do that, it will only boot signed boot images. Frustratingly, one-time programmable things are called OTP. It seems like they never used Erlang. This is a namespace conflict. But yeah, one-time programmable. And with any example of secure boot, you will also run into the instructions for full disk encryption, because you can burn a full disk encryption key into the OTP as well. But I'm not sure you should. See, like a full disk encryption key, that's a secret. And secrets should be handled with care, and if someone yanks the CM4 off of your board, they can just read the EEPROM and the OTP. It's not actually protected in any way, aside from being unchangeable. Being unchangeable is enough for a cert used for signing. It's not enough for disk encryption. And you could get kind of funky and try to do something where you combine the secure boot and checking that something is securely stored on the attack chip to confirm that like all parts are what you expect. And maybe you could store something in the attack chip to ensure that you can do the full disk encryption. We can see. But before we go there, we got to talk about Connor Rigby. Did I mention there will be tangents? Connor is one of the devs. He's unfortunately not here. That would have been more fun. But he's one of those devs that go off on tangents and try things. Like much of, if you've heard the meme, Simpsons did it. In Nerves, it's Connor did it. At least that's my experience. So tiny Adafruit displays of questionable software quality. When I tried one, Connor had already done it. Pi cameras, Connor did it. Nerves on weird hardware, like Nintendo's, Connor did it. Membrane with nerves, Connor did it. SQLite, that's really cool. Can I do SQLite in Elixir? Connor did the first SQLite library. He did not do the current one. Credit to Matt and friends for that one. But I was talking with the client and they were like, yeah, SQLite, but we want the SQL cipher thing where we encrypt the SQLite database. Connor did it. So he has a very nice blog post where he covers how to do that. He had sent a bunch of PRs to SQLite. Everything was essentially in order. I had to futz around a little bit with a custom system, but essentially, as per usual, whenever I try something, Connor has cleared the way. So, back to storing secrets. We need to store 2 secrets, disk encryption and database encryption, and both are symmetric, straight up password style keys. And like the database encryption is debatable whether it's necessary, but defense in depth and all that doesn't hurt to have some encryption on your encryption so you can encrypt while you encrypt. So remember my assurance that we could hide the secrets in the attack 608A. We absolutely could. It can even do AES encryption, so we could store them on disk and then decrypt them at boot and just keep them in RAM. This seems ideal. And then I talked to Frank. And Frank helps me because he's an absolute darling, and he tells me things that are important, but not always things I want to hear. If you spend any time in the Elixir forums, you might have seen an odd uptick in me info dumping Nerves threads. Hello. But Frank has been very helpful to me, and I realized I was absorbing a ton of information directly from him in DMs that would be kind of more beneficial to have in the open, so we're trying to move those conversations as openly as possible. So if you have exchanges secretly with each other about Nerves, like try to have those conversations in the forum if you can, so it's searchable for me later, okay? You know who you are, all of you. Because the Slack doesn't have history, the Discord is kind of, you won't find Discord answers on the web. And like, there's so much knowledge in this room. It's absolutely ridiculous. I've learned a ton already today. So back to encrypting, decrypting, and Frank telling me things I don't want to hear. Frank's bad news for me was that the data moving to and from the attack chip is going over slow, unencrypted I2C. Anyone can read that. And this is not really a problem for signatures, and there's some protection mechanisms available for some parts of the attack operations, but not for the symmetric crypto for some reason. But they'd have to catch it at the right moment, right? And we only do it at startup. But really, it's not hard to make a device restart, usually. So, and I love to quote the datasheet at you, but it's not public. If you really want the full datasheet on a 608, you gotta sign the NDA. And order a minimum quantity of 4,000 pieces. But for my client specifically, we figure out ways to mitigate this, and there might be other ways to work around it. I read up on like the HMAC implementation can potentially be abused to do something secret, yada yada, but it kind of irks me because this is not ideal. So it kind of became personal, and I rabbit-holed hard on this. So what would be the good solution? So if you're like me and you follow Apple a little bit too much, you search for ARM, and you might search for Secure Enclave, which is a very Apple word for things. And then you fall straight on top of like an NXP IMX edgelock trademark promo article. So that's a secure element by NXP. It's also available as a separate chip, the SE050. It's tiny. I got samples. They send out free samples. Did you know that? It's kind of complicated, much more complicated and more pricey than the Attack. So do with that what you will. You can program it with NFC and stuff. It's a lot, but it seems like a fun chip. And I reckon there are other options for secure elements as well. And so I looked at this for a bit. So it seems like it could be a good option. But looking a little bit closer, I also stumbled on I figured ARM would have something in terms of security just for doing it on the SoC, and then you find ARM Trust Zone. And I found out Alex has been digging into this as well separately. ARM Trust Zone lets you divide your computing resources between the trusted region with particular hardware access and limitations, and then a non-trusted region with much less interesting access. And actually, the Raspberry Pi CM4 has ARM Trust Zone. Yay! I forgot the trademark. ARM Trust Zone trademark. Yay! So ARM Trust Zone hardware peripherals are things that only the secure part of the system can use, and typically those are things like the cryptographic accelerators, the secure non-volatile storage, secure real-time clocks, and a bunch of other things. The CM4 has no secure peripherals. The Trust Zone is empty, as far as I can tell. So check your favorite board for secure peripherals today. So if you want to do things with ARM Trust Zone, you'll have to use a different board, and you will run into something called whoop-dee, or OPT, probably. TE is for Trusted Execution Environment, and OP has something to do with IRC, I think. But my hunch is that Trust Zone is probably the proper path to a well-integrated secure element on most modern ARM devices, and we deal with a lot of ARM devices in Nerves. So if you need security, this is where I would look. And you need to look at what is actually in the Trust Zone and actually under protection. IMX processors seem to have a neat thing with a few of the recent ones, where they put this actual SE050 thing in Trust Zone, and you have all those crypto features and stuff covered by the ARM Trust Zone stuff. So because that actually means you have edgelock trademark in the Trust Zone trademark, I think you're double trademark protected, which is always good. So I'm curious to try that. Now, this has been a bit of a learning experience for me. So I learned the true value of friendship and teamwork. I learned that I don't mind data sheets. I learned that all manufacturer websites are really, really bad. And I learned a lot about how much community know-how there is that is not essentially documentable easily, and that is not in the data sheet. And I also learned that you must request a quote if you want to know anything about what anything costs, unless you can check the DigiKey or Mauser or something, and sometimes the information is on there and sometimes it's not. And perhaps more important stuff, my big takeaway is that I got a much better understanding of the security limitations of the Raspberry Pi CM4, I guess, which I think to me, and devs like me that come more from the kind of web end and move into Elixir and then find Nerves and then get interested in this embedded stuff, the Raspberry Pi is the natural on-ramp. And finding out that it has these limitations is kind of a bummer. But this process also let me know a bit about how to look for more secure options and kind of dig in. Like, I've stared at so many data sheets for processors. I didn't think I was qualified for that. And I have this nagging feeling that I should probably help make sure we have a better board for like future CM4 devs to graduate to, because I don't think the CM4 is a bad place to start. It's fine for a bunch of consumer users. It's fun to work with. But I think we need a second step. So I'm very interested in ideas for that. And I think that's all I got. I don't know if I went fast or not, because the timer here is kind of rubbish. But thank you for listening. Questions are welcome, but optional.
Oh, no, you're not getting away. And this question is, I think, very tangential to the work that you've been doing here, but I feel like it has to be asked. Your photos, very pretty. Lots of glowing LEDs in the background, the soft focus, yes.
Yes.
You are perhaps aware of the research some months in the past about grabbing crypto keys based on the luminance of LEDs as the crypto chip draws power. And you did say that you were concerned about security from every angle. So it has to be put out there.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's a screw up on my part. My Pi cluster is under attack, clearly. I figured, like, glamour shots of hardware is something I think we're underserved on. So I took some time with my camera and just played with the lighting in my office a bit.
Sorry, for your clients' concerns.
Are
they worried about people stealing the keys because of the LEDs on a Raspberry Pi because of the crypto chip doing whatever it has to do?
Well, I'm the consultant, so now they are.
I apologize. It was either a silly question or Pandora's box.
It can be both.
Hello. So security is one of my pet peeves, and I'm not sure if Alex has already mentioned this, but to you, there is, well, something that I've also been looking into in the past, and I don't have I have an answer today, but I don't have the most of perfect answers in terms of a list of options for people. But there is one option for full disk encryption, if people are interested in, and that comes for free basically with one of TI's new offerings, the AM62. That comes in with full disk encryption support on some of the models, and I'm pretty sure it has support for a secure enclave on board also. So that might be interesting to look into.
Yeah, I think Alex might have his eyes on TIAM. I think it was 64. Oh, yeah, okay. No more talking about things that will be covered in Alex's presentation. Yes, it does have trust zone. I just started looking at the data sheet because they mentioned it, and it looks promising.